Israeli filmmaker and ex-soldier Ari Folman retraces his steps interviewing veterans of the 1982 Lebanon War, attempting to piece together the hazy memories of his time as a soldier. One prominent memory recurring where Ari Folman as a young man, amongst others, walks out of the sea naked, the sky lit by flares, an enigmatic, apocalyptic vision. During the interviews, the depths of trauma, guilt and alienation are rediscovered, presented with visual poignant brutality. This is Ari Folman's Waltz With Bashir, an Oscar-nominated animated biographical film in the cel-shaded style of a graphic novel, reflecting the form of a documentary, providing honest interviews with real and true-to-life recollections of surviving soldiers during their time serving in the Israel Defense Force, fighting against the Palestine Liberation Organization. With such a contentious, long-running conflict between Israel and Palestine at the film's focus, Ari Folman is careful in his portrayals and interviews, remaining respectful towards his war veteran colleagues, while also demonstrating a strong sense of empathy towards Palestinian citizens caught in the middle of the conflict, becoming targets for needless massacres. Waltz With Bashir, for all its incredibly sleek style and moments of visual playfulness, never forgets to remember how devastating war is on both sides of the battlefield, remaining an incredible example of human empathy. The portrayal of post-traumatic stress disorder is established from the film's earliest images. Seemingly rabid dogs tear through the city, tracking down and waiting by the window to an ex-soldier's apartment. This soldier knows the exact number of dogs and why they're here. He was tasked with shooting dogs that would alert their foes to the Israeli soldiers' whereabouts, and the reason the dogs hunt for him is an unresolved, haunting guilt. He has had this nightmare recurring over the course of 2.5 years because he feels immense guilt for the killing of innocent lives. Most people demonstrate a willing kindness towards animals, and yet we have a young soldier being ordered to kill the dogs on sight, an action he fulfills reluctantly, which he is required to do not only by order of a higher ranking soldier, but because if these dogs successfully alert opposing forces, it would mean death. The stakes are high, and this war veteran, pushed between a rock and a hard place, is pressured into an action that he will continue to feel guilt over. The portrayal of this sequence itself is haunting, reflecting the terror itself that one would experience within a recurring nightmare. It's effective and speaks volumes when it is revealed as post-traumatic stress disorder. Ari Folman's film opening with this sequence demonstrates very early on the lasting, hellish impact that war can have on somebody. Waltz With Bashir is filled with memorable visual sequences that are depicted almost like animated poetry. The film's title, Waltz With Bashir, specifically refers to a recollection in time when veteran Frankel, with his fellow soldiers, is caught in a bullet storm from enemy soldiers firing from a high-rise building, the public watching from their apartment balconies like an audience to a theatre, a desensitization of death becoming the norm. Frankel forcefully takes an MAG from the soldier next to him, confident that he could take on the enemies with his preferred gun. Upon taking it, Frankel gets out of the trench and begins firing into the sky, swirling, sidestepping and swooning in a beautiful choreography like a waltz as he dodges bullets. A banner of Bashir Gemayel, the Lebanese militia commander who led the Lebanese military forces, is hung up behind him. It's an incredibly powerful sequence watching a lone soldier effortlessly dodge through a storm of bullets, almost as if it's an encapsulation of Ari Folman's own personal experience with uncovering his repressed memories of the war. A single man tasks himself with tackling a difficult obstacle to understand an enigmatic recurring memory where the stakes are high and likelihood of achievement is low. What if Ari is unable to find the answers he seeks? While Frankel survived and he is interviewed within the film, it feels almost impossible that he managed to dance so closely to death, living to tell the tale, which could also reflect Ari's own difficulty in uncovering his traumatic memories. The likelihood is low, and yet with his gentle persistence he gradually comes to terms with his own experience. There's a humanity in Waltz With Bashir that acknowledges the difficulty in confronting the self. If one experiences trauma, it is understandable that some people may repress such a trauma. With the passage of time, as well as the horrors Ari Folman experienced as a young teenager in the military, these memories become such a haze, and yet he is perplexed, ever curious about their meanings. Throughout the film, he demonstrates a sense of human empathy for his fellow soldiers and their their own traumas and guilt. As soldiers, murder would eventually be on the schedule, but there is also a regret and sympathy for the innocent lives caught in the crosshairs, and Ari Folman has a sense of respect towards these victims too. The death of innocent lives is a significant point of focus for Waltz with Bashir, as Ari Folman gradually uncovers how many veterans aimed to uncover the devastation of the Sabra and Shatila massacre. The murdering of innocent Palestinian and Lebanese Shiite citizens within a refugee camp, an action committed by a militia close to the Kataib Party, a far-right wing Christian Lebanese party. When soldiers intended to report it, when hearing of the terrible news, many of them were encouraged to keep silent because they had not seen such violence with their own eyes. It's a shocking corruption that Ari Folman's Waltz with Bashir highlights, the taking of over 3,000 civilian lives brushed aside. It's terrifying that such a massacre occurred, innocent lives carted away only to be executed, men, women and children. Ari Folman makes sure that the viewer is not disconnected from this horror due to the film's stylishly animated form. For the final sequence, the film cuts to real-life footage of the damages that this massacre caused, as women mourn in the streets, people weep for the loss of their families and homes, and the bodies of innocent people are piled high. It's horrific, but it's essential that we see this, the devastating impact of war crimes on these innocent victims. Ari Folman is expressing the deepest regrets and sympathies here for the Palestinian and Lebanese victims, acknowledging the damage done by the horror of war. When war perseveres and when war is over, people still remain human, and most humans have a sense of empathy, a sense of humanity which keeps them in touch with their conscience. Ari Folman is encouraging that we do not forget the evils of humanity at its worst, and that the guilt, for example the recurring nightmares and dread of one's own actions within battle, is essential to remaining human. Maybe not quite an atonement, but a remembrance of those terrible consequences of war. In conclusion, Ari Folman's Waltz with Bashir, with its own sense of personal trauma and the troubling recollections of war veterans, manages to focus on one of the most contentious Middle Eastern conflicts in modern history, and provides a humanist empathy and sympathy towards those who sacrificed their youth to fight, damaging their psyches due to regretful actions, and to those innocent lives who were brutally murdered. Waltz with Bashir walks a challenging psychological and biographical tightrope that uncovers the brutality of war, never exploiting the victims for shocks, but also remembering that it is essential to remind viewers, possibly disconnected by the distance between an animated film and war, but also possibly disconnected due to never having experienced such horrific conflict before, that the victims of the Sabra and Shatila massacre are very real.